Boldwood presents Hope for the Future, written by Evelyn Hood and read by Kirsty Cox. This book contains references to incest. Listener discretion is advised. Chapter 1. November 1918. The three Lowrie girls rushed along the street as though their lives depended on it, skirts tangling round their legs, faces red with exertion and arms swinging. Fetching up on the doorstep together, they became a clump of limbs and bodies thumping against the door, each determined to be the first in. "I got here first!" Ruth shrieked as the twins, some 18 months older and a full head taller than she was, tried to push her aside. "No, you didn't, eh? It was me!" Annie panted, while Sarah claimed, "I'm the oldest, I should tell her." Then the latch gave way and they almost fell into the kitchen. "Have you lassies got no sense at all?" Stella Lowrie scolded, pulling her daughters apart and setting them on their feet, roaring down the street like hooligans. "He's here! The boat's here!" Ruth gasped. "He's back!" "Who's here? What boat?" "My father!" Annie yelled. "Don't be daft. Of course he's not here." "He is, Mother," Sarah insisted. "We saw the Fidelity coming in when we were playing up the braes." "We ran down to the harbour to see it," Ruth gabbled. "And it's in a terrible mess," Annie chimed in. "Wait!" The one word came from their mother's lips like the crack of a whip, and the three of them fell silent, the excitement fading as they saw that her brown eyes were huge in a suddenly pale face. "Wait!" she said again, and then took a deep breath. "You're saying that the Fidelity's coming into the harbour now?" "She's already in," Ruth told her. "We went there." "You saw your father?" "He came up the ladder to the harbour wall and Mr. McFarlane was waiting for him." "Who else?" Stella Lowrie demanded to know. "A whole lot of folk. I wanted to talk to my father, but Sarah made me come away." Ruth glared at her sister, who glared back. "I should think so too. What would he have thought if he'd seen the three of you looking like that? Off to the washhouse this minute and get cleaned up." The backyard was reached by a narrow passageway that ran down the side of the house. As the girls scrambled out of the street door, Stella hurriedly checked the pots simmering on the stove. There was just enough meat for one more serving, and plenty of soup, but as for the potatoes... She started to peel more, tossing them into the pot as quickly as she could. James had written to say that the Fidelity, the steam drifter his father and Uncle Albert Lowrie had bought the year that she and James married, was to be decommissioned now that the war was drawing to a close, but he had not said that he would be home so soon. She threw one final potato into the pot, now filled perilously close to the brim, and put the lid on before casting a quick look around the kitchen to make certain that all was ready for the man of the house. The newly black-leaded range shone, the blue and white patterned plates ranged along the dresser shelves were evenly spaced, and the Stafford figurines that had belonged to her own mother were free of even a speck of dust. She almost went to the mirror hanging on the wall, but stopped herself just in time. Once, knowing that James was on his way home would have been enough to send her rushing to study her reflection, pinching her cheeks to highlight them with colour, smoothing her brown hair, pulling the collar of her blouse straight. But not now. She had been a foolish young lassie in those days. Now she was a wife, and a betrayed wife at that. She could have done with one more winter of freedom, she thought, as Ruth scampered back into the kitchen, her small face shining and her hair smoothed down by damp hands. "Is he here yet?" "Do you see him?" her mother asked tartly, and when the child shook her head, "Then he's not here, is he?" "I'll go and look for him." Ruth turned towards the door, almost colliding with her sisters on their way in. "You'll stay here and mind your manners. Annie, set another place at the head of the table for your father. Sarah, see that there's a basin of water and a bar of soap ready in the washhouse," Stella ordered. "He'll want a wash before he eats. And take a towel in with you. she added as her daughter made for the door again. "D'you expect the man to dry his face on his shirt tail?" Then she jumped as an ominous hissing rose from the stove, where the overfull pot of potatoes had started to boil over, and ran to tilt the lid and let some steam out. Down at the harbour, James Lowrie had lingered on board the Fidelity long after his cousin Jem and the rest of the crew had scaled the narrow iron ladder set into the harbour wall, to be met at the top by their families and friends and borne off to their homes. They were all delighted to be home again. But James had mixed feelings. In one way, he never wanted to see Buckie again, and yet he knew that he was forever tied to the place. He looked about the silent drifter that had been his home for so long. The war and the part that the Fidelity had played in it as a minesweeper had kept him fully occupied day in and day out over the past 4.5 years. There had never been time to think of anything but the moment, and for James, that had been a good thing. Heedless of whether or not he survived, he had taken chances. As a result, the Fidelity and her skipper had been mentioned in dispatches. But that meant nothing to him. For as far as he was concerned, the real battle was here in Buckie, and always had been. Time was passing, and he knew that although Stella had not been waiting on the harbour wall to welcome him along with the other wives, someone would have told her, by now, of the Fidelity's arrival. It was time to go. He sighed and hoisted up the shabby wooden box, his seaman's kist, that had travelled everywhere with him since his first trip at the age of 15, just as Jacob McFarlane, who had gone into partnership with him the year before the war started, came down the ladder, moving briskly despite his advancing years. "Welcome home, lad," he held out his hand. "It's been a long time, and they've been hard years, eh?" Then, nodding at the strip of blue painted around the Fidelity's funnel, the mark among fishermen of respect for a lost crewman. "I see you're honouring Charlie." James set the kist down and shook Jacob's strong, hard-skinned hand. "He deserved it. The boat's not been the same without him." He had grown up alongside his cousins, Charlie and Jem. They had gone to the fishing together as lads not long out of school, and Charlie had become the Fidelity's mate when James took over the boat in 1913. Charlie's love of life and everything in it had made him popular everywhere he went. While on minesweeping duties, he had willingly volunteered to go out on another boat when one of its crew fell sick. The boat picked up a mine that exploded as it was being towed clear of the shipping channels, sending the vessel to the bottom immediately, with all hands. "I'll have to go and speak to Uncle Albert about Charlie," James said. "He's no the man he used to be, I can tell you that." Jacob shook his head. "For all that Albert has byblows all around the Murray Firth, Charlie was his favourite. He's taken the lad's death hard. You think when you're young that old folk can deal with death easy enough, being that bit closer to it. But losing folk you've known all your life seems to get harder as you get older. Look at me. I cannae tell you how much I miss your mother, James. I wish you'd been here to say goodbye to her at the end." "It wasn't possible," James said uncomfortably. He had been in Southampton when word of his mother's illness reached him, and, had he wished it, he probably could have managed to snatch a few days' leave and travel home to Buckie. But he had decided otherwise. "She went peaceful, with the rest of us here to see her off on her final voyage. She's lying in the Raffin graveyard now, beside Weem. The way she wanted it, safe in the ground by my father." Even after all these years, James had to fight to keep the bitterness from his voice. Weem Lowrie, his father, had died at sea, and James had wanted to return his body to the deep. Jess Lowrie's insistence on burying her man ashore, where she could tend his grave, had caused a bitter disagreement between mother and son that had never been completely resolved. Jacob let the younger man's comment pass. "The poor old Fidelity's a sorry sight, is she no? She's been through a lot." James rushed to the defence of his beloved drifter. "We've scarce been on land these past few years. We did well to keep her afloat at all, and we to nurse her up along the coast to here. That's why she was decommissioned early. She's worn out. But all she needs is cleaning out and some repair work. New decking, a good coat of paint, give the engine a good scour out, and she'll be ready for the next fishing season." "I was thinking of putting Jem in as skipper of the home fairing next season," Jacob said, naming the boat he had bought to replace the Fidelity during the war years, and then, as James looked at him sharply, "He's ready for it, is he no?" "Aye, well ready. But that means I'd have to train someone else up as mate." Jacob spat over the side into the harbour. "I bought a bonny drifter from a man in Rosehearty a month or two back. I renamed her the Jess Lowrie for your mother, and got up a crew to take her to Lowestoft so she could start earning for us right away. She's younger than the Fidelity, and I thought you could take her over next year." "I've already got my boat." "The Fidelity's getting older, though. Time for ye to move to something better." James felt his hackles rise. "This drifter's got years in her yet." "I'm no arguing with you there, lad. But that's the very reason why we should sell her now. We'd still get a good price for her, and then we can put the money towards buying a third boat, or maybe even have one built at Thompson's yard. This is a good time for consortiums like us," Jacob said earnestly. "A lot of men aren't coming back from the war, God rest them. And some that have got home again are too sore wounded to go back to sea. Boats are going at good prices. This could be our chance to start building up a smart fleet. And I've got it in mind to set the Jess Lowrie at the head of it." "This isn't the time for such talk," he went on before James had the chance to argue further, "for you'll be wanting to see Stella and the bairns after being away for all these years." James seethed as he walked home from the harbour. The Fidelity was the Lowrie family boat, and although he himself had not put a penny towards the cost of buying her, he had sacrificed far more than money. In the days of sale, a fisherman and his sons or his brothers could raise the price of a sailed herring boat between them, mortgaging their homes to borrow the initial outlay and repaying the bank from their labours. But the high cost of steam drifters had put them beyond the means of many men. When the Fidelity came on the market, Weem Lowrie and his brother Albert, hungry for one of the new fast steam drifters, had raised as much money as they could, but even with a loan from the bank, it had not been enough. Then Weem thought of a fellow Buckie fisherman, Mauser Buchan, who was no longer fit enough to run his sailed boat. Mauser, a widower with an unmarried daughter, Stella, was in search of a lusty son-in-law who could keep him in his old age and ensure Stella's future, while Weem had a son of marriageable age. Through marriage to Stella Buchan, James had fallen heir to Mauser's herring boat, and the proceeds from its sale had made up the rest of the money needed to buy the Fidelity. He had paid a high price for the drifter, James thought, as he reached the little fisherman's cottage that had once belonged to Mauser, and he was not going to see her sold on, not after all he and the boat had been through. To his surprise, the cottage was quiet and still, with none of the sounds that passers-by would normally hear, such as children's voices from behind the small windows or the clatter of pots as the next meal was prepared. Perplexed, James lowered his bag and his kist to the ground and rattled the latch. The door was locked, and when he rapped on it there was no reply. He stepped back in order to look up at the chimney. It was without the usual welcome wisp of smoke curling from the lit fire in the range below. "What are you doing at this end of the toon, James Lowrie?" a voice shrilled, and he turned to see their elderly neighbour peering from her own door. "I'm back home, and home to a closed door. Do you know where Stella's off to?" The woman stared, and then gave a cackle of laughter. Surely you ken that Stella and the Quinies have moved into your mither's wee hoosie down in Buckpool, in the main street?
Oh, aye, of course.
James felt his face redden.
I forgot.
Being away frae this place has addled your brain, the woman said. Best get over there, lad. She'll be wearying for a sight of you. Then, as he picked up his bag and kissed and went past her, she laid a hand on his arm.
I'm sorry, Mulholland, about your mither. Jess was a fine woman.
Aye, James agreed, and made his escape towards the old fishing village of Buckpool, now a part of Buckie. As he walked along the shore road to the house where he had been born and raised, the house his wife now presided over in place of his mother, he felt his feet beginning to drag. Stella's heart jumped into her dry mouth when the door latch rattled, but she stayed where she was, facing the stove and with her back to the kitchen. Only when her husband said awkwardly,
"Aye, Stella, lass,"
did she tap the wooden ladle on the edge of the big cast-iron pot, lay it aside carefully, and turn to face him, wiping her hands on her apron. "So you're home?"
"We came into the harbour a wee while back."
He was much the same as before, she saw in her first quick glance, still well-built and broad-shouldered. Then, as he pulled his cap off, she saw that his hair had been cropped. The black curls that had once framed his square, tanned face had gone, and silver glittered about his temples. "You'll be ready for some food?" Stella ran the back of one wrist over her face, which was flushed with the heat from the stove. "It'll not be long. Sarah, Annie, Ruth?" She rounded on her daughters, who were clumped together in a corner, eyeing the newcomer. "Where are your manners? Welcome your father home." The twins murmured a shy greeting, but Ruth went round the table to stand before him. "I'd have come to the boat to meet you, but they wouldn't let me." A backward jerk of her head towards her sisters sent a shock of light brown curly hair swinging round a strong, featured face. This one had taken after him, James realised. While glancing at the twins, he saw Stella in their round faces. Stella as she had been when they married, soft and pretty, with serene eyes and a shy, hopeful smile. Now her cheeks were sunken, and her brown eyes harder. "Is this you back from the war for good?" Ruth broke into his thoughts.
"Eh? Oh, aye, it is."
"So it's over then? Did you beat the Kaiser?" Stella turned to reprimand the child for her impertinence, but held her tongue when she saw that her husband's normally solemn face had been startled into a grin.
"Aye, nearly, though I had to have some help."
James cleared his throat, searching for something to say to his three daughters, and finally ventured,
"You've all grown since I last saw you."
"That's what bairns do." "Ruth," Stella snapped, while Sarah and Annie, clutching each other's hands, gasped at their sister's impertinence. "I'm just saying the truth. I'm 6, Ruth informed her father. "Not long since, but I'm tall for my age." "And cheeky for your age too, you wee lummock," Stella said. "There's soap and a towel ready for you out in the wash-house, James."
"Aye, I'll just—"
He nodded at the bag and the kist he had placed on the floor. "Put them in the next room," she said, adding as he went through to the room where his parents had once slept. "There's space for your things in the wardrobe, and I kept the top 2 drawers of the cupboard empty for you."
"I went to the old house first and found it locked," James said when he was back in the kitchen. "One of the neighbour women told me you were biding here now."
"We've been here these 6 months past. I told you about it in a letter." Stella didn't look at him, but he could hear the hurt in her voice.
Aye, of course you did. I was so busy thinking of being back in Buckie that I let my feet take me to the usual house."
It was a lame excuse, and he suspected that she knew it. He was not much of a reader or a writer, and her letters had been hurriedly scanned and then discarded, the memory of them leaving his mind as the paper fell from his fingers. His own letters consisted of brief reports that he and the rest of the crew were well and busy. Neither of them, throughout the past years, had written any words of affection or even of comfort. "I thought that since your mother had left the house to you as the oldest son, you'd want your family to live here," Stella said. Then, "The soup's ready. You'd best get washed." Chapter 2. When James returned to the kitchen, his hair wet and his skin tingling from the cold water and the pummelling it had received from the rough towel, Ruth stabbed a small finger at the chair at one end of the table. "That's where you sit. Mother says that's your chair and we never get to climb on it, even though you haven't been biding here for a long time." They ate in silence, and when the meal was over, James pushed his chair away and patted his stomach with both hands.
"That was good."
"I'm glad you enjoyed it," Stella said formally, as though he was a guest. "Lasses,
"I'd best go and see my Uncle Albert,"
James said, as the three girls rose obediently to clear the table.
"You want to know all about Charlie."
"Don't stay away for long. Folk'll be coming by to see you and hear about what's been happening," Stella said, and then, when he groaned, "I know you were never one to enjoy a gathering, James, but you've been away for a long time, and it's only natural for the neighbours to want to pay their respects."
"Aye, I suppose so."
He pushed his chair back.
"I'll try not to be too long."
There was no sense in antagonising the woman on his first day home, he thought, as he went out into the street. His father's brother, Albert Lowrie, was a confirmed bachelor who had fathered a large brood of children on a number of women up and down the coast of the Moray Firth, cheerfully acknowledging all of them. Charlie and Jem were both his sons, but Charlie, the older of the two by only a few months, had always been his favourite. When the Fidelity and her crew had left Buckie just after the outbreak of war, Albert had been a sturdy, active man. Now he was a ghost of his former self, grey and silent, huddled in a big wing chair and looking as though he had somehow collapsed in on himself, like a canvas bag that had been emptied and tossed into a corner, James thought, sitting opposite his uncle, trying desperately to think of words of comfort and knowing that none of them would help Albert.
"James already been in to see me?"
The old man's voice was feeble, as though he spoke from a long way away.
"He's my mate now, in place of... He's a grand lad, Jem." "Aye, but Charlie was the one most like me." "Can you think of anything else to tell me about Charlie?"
Albert begged, hungry for memories to hold close in his heart. James returned to Main Street, worn out by the old man's misery, to find the house full of neighbours with more filing in every few minutes, the womenfolk bearing plates and dishes and jugs to ensure a steady supply of food and drink for all the guests. The men were eager to hear about the Fidelity's time down south on active war service, and James, never a great talker, was soon having to clear his throat again and again as his voice began to grow husky. It was a relief to him when the talk became more general. Although there was an air of merriment about the gathering, there was sadness, too. Hundreds of young men had, like James, gone from the Moray Firth to fight for their king and country, and many would never again return to their homeland. As the evening wore on, their names were listed, names familiar to James, coopers and curers, fishermen and boat builders, carters and farm workers, all lost forever. As though the war was not bad enough, the influenza that had begun to sweep across Europe as hostilities drew to an end had decimated those at home as well as those serving their country. Hundreds of the young servicemen who had miraculously survived the fighting succumbed instead to the insidious disease, while others returned home to find that parents, siblings, sweethearts or friends had sickened and died. Sometimes whole families were taken by the influenza, leaving empty, cold, dark and silent houses that had once been bustling, warm homes. It was, the folks said, like the old Black Death they had learned about at school. When at last the well-wishers had all returned to their own homes and the girls were in bed in the upper room, James picked up a newspaper, flicking through its pages and glancing at Stella over the top of it as she put the kitchen to rights. Her once comfortably rounded body was now slim, though still womanly, he noticed. The lamplight picked out grey strands amid the brown hair drawn closely back into a knot at the nape of her neck. And at one point, when she turned and lifted her head suddenly, as though listening for some noise from the attic bedroom above, he saw that her mouth, which had always been swift to tremble when she was upset or quiver into a smile when she was happy, had firmed, and there were new lines between her dark eyes. But then, the war had made a difference to them all. Apparently satisfied that their daughters were asleep upstairs and none of them needed her attention, she bent to pick something up from the floor, her breasts pushing against the front of her blouse. Recalling the feel of her soft body against his, James felt a sudden surge of desire and anticipation. He laid the paper down and cleared his throat.
"I'll just go out by and have a smoke before I go to my bed."
Outside, he leaned against the house wall, the smoke from his pipe twisting up from the bowl to lose itself in the darkness. He thought about Stella. He had not been a good husband to her. He knew that. From the very beginning he had resented being tied down to a loveless marriage. It had never occurred to him to wonder how Stella felt about their union, and if she was content. All he knew, as time went on and their 3 daughters arrived, each birth dashing his hopes of a son, was that Stella, gentle, biddable, anxious to please Stella, was not enough for him, and never would be. He needed more, and he had found it where he should never have looked. And Stella had found out. He gave a soft groan at the memory of those dark days. In a way, the Great War had been a blessing because it took him away from Buckie, away from sinful temptation and from Stella's silent condemnation. But now, 5 years on from those hot-headed, hot-blooded days, James Lowrie watched the smoke from his pipe swirl and drift and disappear into the night, and wondered if he and his wife could make another beginning. Part of his irritation with her had lain in her failure to produce the sons he wanted, laddies to be taken to the fishing and taught the ways of the sea and of the silver darlings that came each year in their huge shoals, and to take over when James finally became too old to haul in a net heavy with the dancing, shimmering herring. Stella had lost 2 children in the 6 years since Ruth's birth. One early in her pregnancy, and the other stillborn in the week war was declared. The second child had been the boy that they both longed for. Stella, her eyes sunk in an ashen face, had scarcely risen from her bed when James took the fidelity to war. But they were both still young and fit, James thought now. There was time yet for them to produce a laddie, or maybe 2. Boots clattered on cobbles, and a neighbour went by on his way home.
"Aye, James," he said cheerily, "it's a caul night. Winter's coming."
"Aye," James agreed, and knocked his pipe out against the house wall. Stella was already in bed when he went back into the house, lying on her side, her eyes closed, and her hair in a long plait that lay along the curve of her back. James was not entirely comfortable about undressing in the room his parents had shared. The big chest of drawers and the bed had been there for as long as he could remember, though Stella had brought 2 chairs, a plain wooden upright and a low nursing chair, from her father's house. He eyed the nursing chair, recalling her sitting in it years back, head bent over the baby cradled in her arms. He remembered the easy, natural way she drew her blouse aside, bearing a breast white as the milk that made it even heavier than normal, and the beautiful, delicate tracery of blue veins against her alabaster skin. She did not stir when he blew out the lamp and slipped into bed beside her. For a moment, he lay still, listening to her even breathing. Then he laid a tentative hand on her shoulder. The muscles tensed beneath his fingers, and her breathing stopped, and then began again, slow and steady and controlled. James took his hand away and turned over so that they lay back to back. It was a long time before either of them slept. James Lowrie strode down to the harbour on the following morning, his studded boots striking sparks from the cobblestones. He was his father's son, never happy unless he was free of the land and the people on it, and besides, he'd been away from the fishing for too long. After years of searching the seas for man-made, death-dealing mines, he yearned to get back to his own trade. The older men who hung about the harbour, clinging to memories of their own fishing days, tried to draw him into their talk, but he finally managed to escape them and get along to where the Fidelity awaited him. For a few minutes, he stood on the stone wall above her, trying to see her through Jacob's eyes. In the watery morning sunlight, the drifter was a sorry sight, but she could be put to rights. The first thing to be done was an inventory of all the work that was needed. James skimmed down the ladder, his booted feet landing on the deck with a satisfying thud, and then he made for the rope locker immediately below the forward deck. Normally, it was used to house the coiled messenger warp that carried the fishing nets, but over the years it had become a storage space where all sorts of bits and pieces had been tossed out of the way. As he opened the double doors, not much larger than window shutters, he heard a skittering sound from the dark, smelly interior. James swore roundly, snatching at a bucket lying close to the door. He'd have no rats on his boat. "Get out of it!" he roared, banging the bucket against the decking by the door. "Filthy, stinking vermin!" Then, as there was no reaction, not even the scampering and panic-stricken squeaking he had expected, he threw the bucket into the darkness of the locker. "Ow!" "What? Come out of there!" When there was no reply, James, almost bent double in his attempt to peer into the thick darkness, dropped to his knees and reached with a long arm. His fingers encountered cloth. Reaching further, they closed round the material and the flesh and bone it covered. "Ow! Ow! Ow!" came the protests as his captive was pulled willy-nilly through the clutter of boxes, buckets, ropes and rubbish. Then he was out in the open, dishevelled and dirty, blinking up at James. "What are you doing on my boat?" "Just looking," the small boy said defensively. "Aye, and just taking too, I've no doubt. Turn your pockets out." "I will not. I never took anything from your smelly old boat." The lad's impertinence took James aback. His grip slackened, and the child, taking advantage of it, wriggled like an eel and would have been off if James hadn't managed to tighten his hold just in time. Enraged, the little boy kicked out, and one of his sturdy boots delivered a painful crack on the man's shin. Without stopping to think, James hit back, an open-handed slap that rang through the air as it landed on the side of the boy's head. "Ow!" he yelled again. His knees sagged, and James had to catch him with both hands to keep him upright. For a moment, the boy drooped towards him. Then he rallied and glared up at his captor, blinking back sudden tears of pain and shock. "You hit me!" "And I'll hit you again if I get any more of your insolence, so mind that, my loon. You need to be taught a lesson, and if your father doesn't see to it, then I will. Where'd you come from?" "Buckie, the same as you?" Although one ear was scarlet from the blow, the child had not lost his bravado. "I mean, where do you live?" The boy hesitated, biting his lip, and then, as James shook him, he blurted out, "Cliff Terrace!" "Cliff Terrace?"
What are you creeping around my boat for if it's not for mischief?
I just wanted to see it.
You'll not see much in there.
James jerked his head towards the black hole that was the rope locker.
What's your name?
Your name, lad, he repeated with another shake as the boy remained silent, his grey eyes flickering from side to side as though in search of a suitable answer.
And I want the truth, mind. I can find out easy enough if you try to lie to me.
The child gave a heavy sigh and then said reluctantly, Adam Pate.
Pate.
All at once, James felt the blood drain out of him, from his skull pan to the soles of his feet. He would not have been surprised to find it puddling on the deck around his boots.
Gil Pate's boy.
Aye, and when my father hears that you hit me, he'll come after you, the child stormed. He's a big man, and he'll—
How old are you?
James asked hoarsely. 4 years past.
Aye. That would be about right, James thought,
releasing the boy who rubbed at his sore arm. You're my Uncle James home from the wars, you know, he asked. I just wanted to see the boat. It's a sorry-looking thing.
Aye, well, so are you right now, and the Fidelis has been through a lot more than you have. Come on.
James made for the ladder leading to the harbour.
Up you go. I'm taking you home.
I can go by myself. I came down here by myself.
I'm taking you home,
James said again, and scaled the ladder, leaving the lad to scuffle up after him. They walked up the hill to Cliff Terrace in silence, James easing back on his usual stride to allow the boy to keep up, and Adam too busy running alongside to find the breath to talk. As they reached the terrace, James stopped, swung the child round, but with a gentler grip than before, and squatted so that they were eye to eye.
You'd best get tidied up before your mother sees you, he said.
By good fortune, Stella had tucked a clean handkerchief into his pocket before he left the house. He had no time for such fripperies himself, but now he was glad of the snowy square of material. He held it out to Adam, as he had seen Stella doing with his own children, and after the little boy automatically spat on it, James carefully wiped the worst of the rope locker grime off his face before running his fingers through the dark hair, then tugging at the lad's jacket. Adam squirmed, little knowing that the attention he was receiving had nothing to do with making him more presentable. It was done solely in order to allow James to study him and to touch him. The grey eyes, he now realised, were just like his father's and his sister's, and his own, if it came to that. The child had a tumble of dark hair, again the same colouring as James and his own father, weem before him. His face was square-chinned and pleasing to the eye, and his sturdy little body held itself well. Are you done now? Adam finally asked, a pleading note in his voice. And when James nodded and straightened, stuffing the handkerchief into his pocket, the lad grinned his relief and turned to point at the row of smart 2-storey houses built not long before on the hill above the harbour, facing out to sea. Is that house over there? He said, and set off at a trot. James stayed where he was, watching him. What do you mean, lassie? Gone? Bethany Pate asked from the stove, where she was ladling porridge from a large pot. He's no in his bed, and nowhere to be seen in the house, the maidservant said. That sort of gone? Mind your impudence. He'll be in the backyard. I've looked. Lizzie snapped back at her employer. Rory, was Adam still in his bed when you came down? Bethany appealed to her stepson, waiting patiently at the table for his breakfast. He was up before me. I thought he was down here with you, or out in the backyard. Rory wanted no part of the responsibility for his young brother. It was enough to have to share a bedroom with Adam, who never seemed to be at rest, even when he was sleeping. Are his clothes gone, or is he still in his nightshirt? I didn't see his clothes, but they might have been in the room. Lizzie, go and see, and then look round the rest of the house while you're at it, Bethany ordered. I I thought I heard the front door closing when I was getting dressed, Ellen offered, taking 2 plates of porridge from the stove to the table, where she put one in front of her brother and sat down to eat the other. And you never thought to say? Why would I? 7-year-old Ellen asked. I thought it might be you going out early, or my father home from Yarmouth. He's not expected in as early as... The cooperage, Bethany suddenly realised. That's where the wee imp of Satan's gone. Wait till I get my hands on him. She stopped in the middle of ladling out her own porridge and hurried into the hall, while Rory and Ellen, used to their young half-brother setting off such alarms, rolled their eyes at each other and went on eating. Lizzie! Bethany shouted up the carpeted staircase. Is there any sign of him yet? The maid appeared at the top of the stairs. No, there's not, but he's got himself dressed all right. He'll have gone down to the cooperage. Bethany began to unfasten her apron. See that Rory and Ellen get off to the school on time, lassie, and have your own breakfast. I'm away to the harbour to fetch Master Adam and give him the rough edge of my tongue. Snatching her jacket from the hall stand, she hurried out, pushing her arms into the jacket sleeves as she went. The first time Adam had found his way to the cooperage alone, when he was only 3, he had not been noticed until one of the men caught him trying to peer over the edge of a vat of boiling water. There were so many dangers for a wee laddie in that place. The fires needed to bring the water to boiling point so that the steam could be used to soften the staves, the scalding water itself, the hammers. So many things to harm a small boy with an unquenchable curiosity and no fear at all. She reached the gate and had gone through it to the road when she saw her son marching towards her. Adam! Adam Pate, you wee imp! She flew at him, crouching down before him and taking his shoulders in her 2 hands so that she could study him and make sure that he was safe and unharmed. Where have you been? He shrugged himself free. I went to see my uncle's boat. Your uncle? For a moment, Bethany thought that he was talking of Gil's brother Nathan or her own brother Innes, but neither man owned a boat. Then, as Adam went on, He's come back with me, and turned to point. She looked up to see her older brother standing several paces away, watching the 2 of them. Worry and relief vanished, to be replaced by a strange sensation, as though time itself had stopped. Bethany got to her feet slowly, struggling to push her body upright through air that had become almost solid. She reached for Adam's shoulder, keeping him near to her, keeping him safe. James, she said, and the word, dropping from her numbed lips, broke the spell.
You look as though you'd seen a ghost, Bethany.
He took a step or 2 towards her.
Did you not know I was back?
The bairns said they'd seen the Fidelity coming in yesterday, she acknowledged. But... She looked down at the child at her side and then back at James, who had pulled his cap off. Clutching it in one hand, he indicated Adam with the other.
I found the wee lad down at the harbour.
I wanted to see what the boat looked like, Adam prattled cheerfully. This is my Uncle James, home from the war. I know who it is. Bethany tore her attention away from her brother to her son. You're a bad laddie. I've a good mind to give you a whipping.
No,
James said swiftly, and then, as she glared at him, he added lamely,
He meant no harm. He was just curious to see the Fidelity.
It's all right, Adam assured him. She'd not really whip me. Anyway, my father's coming back today and he wouldn't let her.
Don't you be so sure of that, my loon.
Bethany spun him round to face the gate and then gave him a slight push. Go to the house at once and tell Lizzie to get you cleaned up, then give you your breakfast. Come on in, Adam invited James. He's too busy. Go on now before I change my mind about that whipping. Chapter 3.
He only wanted to see the boat,
James protested as the little boy went off. He knows that he's not supposed to go out of the house without permission.
Ugh, he's a laddie, and laddies aren't good at keeping to the rules.
You're as soft as Gil is, she said scathingly.
It's been a long time, Bethany,
His eyes, grey like her own and like Adam's, travelled over her face.
Only 4 years, but they've been long, long years.
He looked beyond her as he spoke, his eyes intent. Bethany turned to see Adam slapping the palms of both hands on the door panels. When Lizzie answered the summons, he pushed by her knees and disappeared into the house.
That's a fine bairn you've got there, Bethany,
James said, and she swung back to face him again. Gil's right proud of him.
Any man would be proud to call that wee loon his son.
Her hands clenched by her sides. Why have you come here, James?
I told you. I found the boy on the boat and brought him back to you.
He studied the row of handsome houses.
You've done well for yourself.
Gil's a good provider.
Aye, good at packing and selling the fish that other men catch, James said quietly. Did the boy say that he's coming home today?
Later, from Yarmouth.
I'll see him then.
What do you want to see Gil for? She asked sharply.
You needn't concern yourself. I'm not out to cause trouble.
If you mean that, you'll keep away from this house and from Adam. He's none of your business.
Are you certain of that, Bethany?
He studied her, his head tilted to one side, his eyes searching hers. Of course I'm certain. I'm his mother.
When I saw him down there on my boat just now...
That's enough, James.
You weren't always so cold towards me, Bethany, he said,
and colour rose up beneath the smooth skin of her face. We all make mistakes we regret, she said, and turned back to the house, her erect back daring him to follow. As he hesitated, the door burst open and 2 older children erupted down the path and out of the gate. Uncle James! The boy came rushing towards James, grinning, with his sister just behind him. It's me, Rory. We saw the boat coming in yesterday when we were all playing on the braes, the girl chimed in. Her name was Ellen, James remembered, then realised guiltily that he had identified his sister's stepdaughter more easily than his own daughters. I knew right away that it was the Fidelity, Rory said proudly.
Did you?
Off you go, the pair of you, or you'll be late for school, Bethany snapped. And as they hurried off with a final grin at their uncle, she added, And if you'll excuse me, James, I've got a house to see to. As Bethany went into the house, Adam shot out of the kitchen like a cork from a bottle. Is my Uncle James not with you? I wanted to talk to him. He's too busy to be bothered with wee loons like you, Bethany retorted. Especially loons that run out of the house and give their mothers a fright. You deserve a good scalp. But I came back. I always come back. For now, you come back, Bethany thought, her very bones melting with love for her only child. But the day would come when her most precious possession would go out into the world to make his own way and not return to her. She picked him up and carried him to the kitchen, where the maid was washing the dishes. Keep him close by you, Lizzie, she said, and went into the front parlour to peer out from behind the snowy lace curtains hung over the bay window to ensure privacy for the inmates of the house. At the other side of the road, the ground dropped down to the harbour below, allowing a good view of the Murray Firth stretching to the far horizon. From the side window, she could just see James disappearing down the road. Almost at once, he went beyond her sight, and she gave a small, soundless sigh, then turned to face the room. Until he and his brother Nathan, a fish curer, had gone into partnership with Jacob McFarlane, Gil had been content enough to live in a small house in the Catbow, a district of Buckie. But the fortune Jacob had amassed during years spent travelling the world meant that the Pate businesses were able to expand, and it was then that Gil became ambitious. The need for food production during the war had been lucrative for both brothers and had enabled Gil to buy and furnish the fine house Bethany now stood in. The drawing room, with its carpets and its large comfortable chairs and gleaming furniture, reflected its owner's success admirably. Tall vases, the height of 4-year-old Adam, flanked the fireplace with its polished fire irons, and carefully selected ornaments were displayed on the sideboard and on the mantelshelf, where they stood on either side of a handsome clock in the shape of a pillared temple. It was a far cry from the cottage Bethany and her 2 brothers had been raised in, and although she had been mistress of the place for the past 4 years, she had never felt at home there, for she was still a fisherman's daughter to the tips of her fingers. She smiled slightly as she heard a faint peal of childish laughter from the kitchen, then bit her lip. She was more severe with Adam than she had ever been with Rory and Ellen, her stepchildren, and that troubled Gil at times. But Bethany knew it was nothing more than a defence against the passionate, overprotective love she had felt for the child from the moment of his birth. She would kill, if need be, to keep him safe from harm. Often she lay awake at night, fearful of some harm coming to him. And now, with the Fidelity lying down in the harbour, she was doubly afraid for her son, and uncertain of her own ability to safeguard him. She turned back to the window and stared out over the white-flecked sea, wishing that James had never come back to Buckie. James went straight from the confrontation with his sister to the harbour, where he dropped down onto the Fidelity's deck and then walked up into the bows, staring down at the smooth, dark harbour water below. It had been a difficult homecoming, and now there was the lad, Adam, to reckon with. Recalling the child's bonny wee face and his eagerness to see the drifter, James wished that he could have the chance to spend some time with him, but he knew that Bethany would never allow it.
Welcome home, James.
He spun round and stared at the tall, lanky man standing on the harbour wall above.
Innes?
He asked uncertainly.
Aye, it's me right enough. Can I come aboard? Surely.
James watched as his younger brother descended the ladder from the harbour wall slowly and carefully, making sure of each handhold and feeling carefully for every rung with his foot before trusting his weight to it. Finally, Innes put a foot on the gunwale, hesitated. Then, just as James started forward to help, he managed the final drop away from the ladder and down onto the deck.
Welcome home,
he said again, holding out a hand. He had aged more than the 4 or 5 years since they had last seen each other. Silver streaks glittered in his thick black hair, and his dark eyes, their mother's eyes, were sunk into their sockets. Innes had always been thinner than James, but now he looked as if a strong gale might blow him away. Even so, his grip was firm.
Are you well? Stella told me in a letter that...
James stopped, unsure of how to put it. That I was invalided out because the mustard gas went for my lungs. His brother completed the sentence for him. I'm fine. He thumped his own chest lightly. I'll always be damaged, but it doesn't trouble me overmuch.
You're working back at Webster's garage then? I'm at Thompson's boatyard now. I earn more there, and with the bairns coming along so fast, we needed more money. How many bairns do you have?
Pride shone from Innes's face.
There's Mary, and Will, and Jessie, and wee Matthew's the youngest, and there's another arriving at the turn of the year. Jessie. She'll have been named for our mother. Aye. She was born just months afore Mother died. She was right proud to have her name passed on to the wee one. Will was named after our father, and Zelda's father too, though she'll not admit to that, with him being such a thrawn old bugger, said Innes, who had been beaten black and blue by Zelda's enraged father when he discovered that she was pregnant with no wedding ring on her finger. We've got a wee hussy in Gordon Street. Zelda would be pleased to see you there, James, and so would Aunt Meg. Aunt Meg's biding with you and Zelda. The old soul's not fit to bide on her own now, and she's good company for Zelda, said Innes. Then, studying the faded paintwork and the decking, gouged and splintered in places. You've had a longer war than I had, you and the Fidelity. It wasn't an easy time, James acknowledged. The whole town misses Charlie. He was a friend to everyone, especially the lassies. Aye.
For a fleeting moment, the brothers exchanged faint smiles. Then James said,
I keep expecting to see him everywhere I go on this boat.
A brief silence fell between them before Innes asked,
How's the engine? As good as it ever was. I'll just have a wee look at it since I'm here.
Innes made for the galley, where an inner companionway led to the engine room. Years before, James recalled as he followed his brother down into the bowels of the drifter, Innes had had such a fear of the sea, and of anything to do with the sea, that it had been a struggle to get him to look at the engines. James had thought Innes a coward, but the long, hard war years had taught him that bravery was not always obvious. By forcing himself onto the boat in those days, Innes had shown courage. He had demonstrated it again when he held to his determination to marry Zelda despite being half killed by her father, and yet again on the day he had faced up to James on the Fidelity's spray-soaked, heaving deck. That confrontation was not a memory that James enjoyed, for Innes had been the victor, and the memory of the utter contempt in his look that day still made James wince.
They'll do, Innes finally pronounced. Of course they will. The drifter herself will be finished before the engines give out.
Innes's teeth flashed white in the gloom as he grinned.
You're right there, he said, and then wiped a hand across his brow. Let's get out of here and catch a breath of air. This boat still has a stink of fish about it. It's been years since she was at the fishing, James argued as his brother pushed past him. There's no smell of fish to her now.
There is, Innes told him, and began to climb. His progress became slower as he went up, and once back on deck he leaned his shoulder against the engine cowling, gasping, hands on his knees, head hanging and his eyes closed.
Are you all right?
James asked, alarmed, and his brother nodded, flapping a hand as though trying to wave the questions away.
Leave me for a minute.
His voice was a low, painful wheeze. It hurt to watch him struggle to draw air into his damaged lungs and not to be able to help. James took him at his word and went into the wheelhouse, where he loitered until, to his relief, he finally saw Innes straighten up and wipe his mouth with a handkerchief.
I just need time to catch my breath when I've been too active, he said in a matter-of-fact voice when James joined him. You'll get used to it, the same as I've had to. It takes a wee bit of getting used to.
Innes made as if to wipe the worst of the oil and grime from his hands with the handkerchief, thought the better of it, put the handkerchief carefully into one pocket and took a rag from another.
The mustard gas made a right mess of my lungs, he explained as he cleaned oil from his fingers. For a while I'd not have been given a penny for my chances, but Zelda told me straight that she wasn't going to be a widow so young. She's a grand lass, is Zelda. She and Mother nursed me back to health atween them.
Then, straightening to his full height,
So when are you going to start putting this boat to rights? Jacob wants to sell her. He's got a new boat, James said, and he wants me to skipper her.
Innes nodded.
That would be the Jess Lowrie. She's a fine wee drifter, a good few years younger than this one. But you're surely not going to let the Fidelity go, are you? I may not be a fisherman, Innes went on as James shot a startled glance at him, but I know what this drifter meant to our father and what it means to you. That doesn't seem to mean anything to Jacob, though. Why should it? This is the Lowrie boat, James, and Jacob McFarlane isn't a Lowrie. He's a businessman. Granted, he's made sure he got his feet well and truly below the Lowrie table, Innes said, and he started that by buying a big share in the Fidelity. I don't see what you're getting at. Jacob didn't come back to Buckie to set up in business with you and Gil and Nathan. He came back to marry our mother. The man told me about it himself just after she died. He was in a terrible state, poor soul. He had to talk to someone. Innes recollected, pity in his voice. He grew up next door to her, and he never wanted anyone else but her. only she chose our father, and Jacob went away then, for he couldn't bear to see the two of them together. When he heard that she was a widow woman, he came back and tried to get her to take him as husband, but she'd no thought of marrying again. So, since he couldn't wed into the Lowrie family, he used the money he'd made in his travels to buy his way in. Jacob McFarlane told you all that? Not word for word, you understand, but enough so's I could work it out for myself. I don't think he realised just how much he did tell me. So there he was, with the biggest share in Weem Lowrie's boat, Weem's son to catch the fish, Weem's son-in-law to pickle them, and Nathan Pate to kipper them. A nice wee arrangement. And what about you? Innes grinned. Mind that bonny motor car he bought when he first came back to Buckie? I had a grand time driving him about in it and looking after it for him. Oh, it was a bonny motor, James. I was still biding with Mother then, so Jacob was anxious to make friends with me. He even offered to buy a garage for me when I wed Zelda, but I refused him, for I wanted to make my own way in life. So I was the fool that let him do what he wanted with me, is that it? No fool, for Jacob was your only chance to get command of the Fidelity. But now that he's built up a bonny business here, he's got no need of her. Can you not see that? This was Weem Lowrie's boat, and to my way of thinking, Jacob's happy to replace it with a boat he bought himself, and renamed the Jess Lowrie. Innes stared at his younger brother, marvelling at the man's shrewd mind, and wondering why he had never noticed the way of things himself. Then he turned and looked along the length of the drifter. You and Bethany have shares in her, he said thoughtfully. Our mother had too, though I don't know who has her shares now. She left them to me, Innes said. You could help me to talk Jacob round. Innes shook his head. For one thing, nobody can change Jacob's mind once it's set on something. If you want to keep the boat, you'll have to find a way to buy Jacob out. Buy him out? But steam drifters cost more than £5,000. That's more than I can afford, more than I can borrow even. You could find yourself a partner. Not me, for I can't afford it, Jacob said as his brother looked at him with sudden hope. And I doubt if Bethany would be interested. Not that she'll have the money either. You both hold shares in her. Aye, but we've always looked on this as our father's boat, James. And now it's yours. And Jacob's. It was never mine or Bethany's. Or even Mother's. Are you saying that you'll no help me? I'm saying that I can't. You'll have to find your own solution. Or go along with Jacob's plans. Chapter 4. It was peaceful, Stella thought that night, with her on one side of the hearth with her mending, and James on the other, reading the newspaper. It was the way she wanted it, for Stella was the sort of woman who needed love and security. She knew that his father had pushed James, a carefree bachelor who had always had a string of sweethearts, into their marriage. But even so, she had agreed to the union because she loved him, and had loved him for years. Being timid and unsure of herself, she had kept her feelings for the good-looking young fisherman to herself, knowing that he would never freely choose the likes of her as a wife. Weem Lowrie's need for her father's sailed boat and the money it represented to him had made a dream come true, and it had been her fervent hope that in time James would come to love her. But she had never been enough for him. He had looked elsewhere and... Stella's mind flinched away from the memory of those terrible, hurting weeks, and she made herself blank it out by concentrating hard on the needle, busily dipping in and out of a tear in Ruth's underskirt. As the turmoil within began to ease, she wondered if she should, after all, have turned to him in bed the night before, instead of denying him. Perhaps it was time to forgive the past, even if it could never be forgotten. The thought of the two of them going through the rest of their lives like strangers was unbearable. I was thinking about your father's wee hussy, James said just then. It'll fetch a good price. I've no notion to sell it, Stella said, keeping her head bent over her work. What else would we do with it? We cannae live in 2 houses at the one time.
I was thinking of hiring it out.
You what?
Now that the war's over, the summer visitors will be coming back to the Firth, and I thought I could hire the house out to them. And there's all the folk who come here for the fishing season too. She glanced up at him, anxious to get him to understand. I can use the house to earn my own way.
There's no need for that now I'm back home.